I was never really comfortable with the idea of an exclusive truth that was available to a subsection of the population. It never really sat well with me. My goal was to arrive at a summation of universal, transcendent truth beyond human agency, beyond human creativity.
I think that I can also see myself at some point in this journey where I also felt like we were all in a box. And the challenge of being in that box, it's just somehow thinking there's no world outside of that.
So when I started to ask these questions, it was like I was in possession of a virus of some kind that I needed to keep hidden from the rest of the community. And it was difficult because it meant that I was increasingly isolated. There was no one to have these conversations with about my cracking open until I left the university that I could truly blossom, that I could really flourish, and I could find others who were just as willing, who were breaking away and didn't find it pathological.
Let me get started, my guys. Thank you so much, Bayo, for joining today. I think one of the things that struck me is just realizing the things you were saying were things quite a number of my friends and I have been talking about, just understanding a new world. And but I wanted to even start by your own personal evolution, right? I know you were, like most of us, church boy, and you grew to a point where you started to question a lot of things, and particularly the concept of our concept of exclusivity. Like, oh, I have this exclusive position on truth, and nobody else has any other thing I want to listen to. And, you know, in a lot of ways, the concept of separation, where we were separated from the other, we're separated from an entire ecosystem, and very individualistic in that sense. But at what point did your unlearning start for you? Was there an event that led you to that point?
Oh, really? Okay. I suppose that I was never really comfortable with the idea of an exclusive truth that was available to a subsection of the population. It never really sat well with me. And yes, I was a church boy. I was a church boy raised to the nth degree. I had all the epaulettes, you know, and signs and military insignia to show that I was deeply in the faith. So deep, in fact, as to be. I don't know how close those people you were talking with about my days in CU. I don't know how close they were to me. I was not close to anyone per se. I was a nerd. I was isolated. I was reclusive. I was like a hermit. My nickname was TMC, and TMC was the title of our course, the university-wide course that was mandatory for everyone. Total Man Concept. That was the name. I was nicknamed after the course that was designed to make everyone perfect, right? Because no one could. I was like, yeah, I was clockwork, precision, Kantian. I didn't interact with people. People thought I was weird, and yeah, the whole drill. Um, and I think my goal was to arrive at a summation of universal, transcendent truth beyond human agency, beyond human creativity. My sense, and this was also motivated by trauma, the loss of my dad, right? Yeah, it was the sense that I could only find him or return to him or reverse the trauma of his passing, his untimely passing, if I found myself in this realm of big T truth, is what I used to call it. But slowly, it wasn't a single event, brother. It was a slow composting, right? It was, I guess, a combination of noticing the haughtiness of those Christians who presumed themselves arrived, who presumed themselves already in possession of the truth, and how they behaved to others, right? It was the idea of an exclusive truth. It wasn't a singular blow of moment. It was the drip, drip, drip of multiple events, multiple moments that felt like a medicine here. It was like I was saying that it was the very idea of an exclusive truth. It was the sense of haughtiness that I saw, that I witnessed, observed in those fellow Christians who presumed themselves transcendent, who behaved as if, oh, I mean, we've arrived. And we have it. We have this idea. We have this ideology. And anyone else that doesn't have it is, of course, banished to hell. It just felt performatively repulsive. Right? It was that, and it seemed to be jarringly disturbing to my sense of beauty. My sense of beauty about the universe did not have this binary formulation of heavens and hells and people who get it and people who don't. Um, I started to ask questions about culture and placement. You see, I was trying to resolve it, as most of my reclusive days were spent trying to resolve theology. I wasn't even studying psychology. I mean, that was what I was in for as an undergrad. I was supposed to be studying psychology, but instead I was writing a book. I wrote a 200-page book on Moses or Darwin. It was called Moses or Darwin: um, how how evolution, how creation and evolution, something like that. The investor was very excited about it. 200 pages. It was deeply investigative. It was. I couldn't publish it. I'm not going to publish it now because I don't agree with the things I said. It was my birthing process.
Yeah.
But it showed the things that I was committed to. I was deeply enamored of a world that should have the fingerprints of a divine being. And so I looked for it in cultural anthropology, in evolution, macro and micro, in all the ways that I sensed that God would be alive. In fact, when I dabbled in psychology, I was looking for evidence in cognitive, clinical, and neuropsychology. I was studying books as what was that book that my mother sent to me when I was in second year? I think it was Karl Popper, and this other guy, and it was called The Self and Its Brain. And I was trying to understand interactionism, how the spirit supposedly interacts with the body at the pineal gland. These were all the things I was in touch with. Of course, I didn't study my psychology, but I still came out of the first class because it was trivial. But it was those moments. It was my studies. It was my sense of loss with my father. It was a sense of repulsion, which felt like a gift that I sensed in those who behaved as if they understood everything. It was a whole host of all these things. And one day I picked myself up and I went to a mosque. Maybe I shouldn't say this on, but
No, please.
I went to a mosque, and I didn't know what I was doing there. I just wanted to break the idea of exclusivity. So I took a bus from Covenant, and I had a pass to leave the campus that day. If you know how the school works, you would understand what I mean. And I went to a mosque, and I just sat outside of it. I didn't go inside. I didn't know what it would mean to go inside, but I wanted to almost be there to almost validate their experiences, to say you're not wrong. Maybe we're all figuring this out together. It wasn't until I read a dude called Jorge Ferrer, who wrote about participatory spirituality, did I start to find a language to frame my confusion, my understanding of spirituality, the breaks I was having, especially with this idea of an exclusive truth. And then from there, it was sailing all the way.
Well, this is exciting. I think that I can also see myself at some point in this journey where I also felt like we were all in a box, and the challenge of being in that box, it's just somehow thinking there is no world outside of that. And I started to have a new appreciation for other body of works. I started to look to, for me, I was interested in quite a bit. I looked into science. I was interested in science and non-duality. I was excited about the new discoveries about quantum physics and what we could learn about the human ecosystem and how intricately connected we were. But again, we've had this paradigm, I think it was the poet Frost that said 2 roads diverged in the middle of the wood, and I took the road less traveled, and it made all the difference. For most of us I also pastored at some point, and when you get that deep, you start to realize at some point.
You have that vibe. You have that pastoral vibe.
But as you're evolving, you're understanding the world, and somehow it means like you're moving away from the mainstream, and a lot comes with that. And I don't know how your journey would have been, because someone who was sort of like a little bit of a poster kid for a school that was a Christian faith school. I don't know if you could walk us through that journey of discovery, the alienation, the misunderstanding, and I don't know how you could have found the courage to even plunge deeper without feeling like, am I losing my way? Am I getting lost in this newfound curiosity? Do I stop myself and start seeking help, or this is the journey that I'm being invited to unfold in? So I wanted to see if that you could give us a snapshot of that journey of moving away from the confines of the concept of that Christian tradition to now starting to
Right.
appreciate both sides, even thinking at the bigger concept of cosmology, even talking about Africa's spirituality, looking into your
Right.
Yoruba culture, and wanting to say,
Right.
there are many things in my culture that I see beauty in. It doesn't have to feel
Mm-hmm.
tidy, but I can see the beauty. So I really want to see what that journey has been for you, moving into that and the losing friends and respect, and even people that felt you were supposed to be somebody they wanted to listen to, now wanting to pull away. Because I know that that peeling away can be very painful for many African intellectuals or people who just want to even understand God and question a lot. People start to fear you. What was it for you?
Mm-hmm. Oh, Ferdy, I get a lot of questions, the hundreds and hundreds of podcasts. That one was deliciously composed. So thank you. I don't get to
Thanks,
speak about
thanks.
these things actually every day and go in depth. And maybe this feels closer to home, given that we're from the same place. Um, it definitely was not easy, but at the same time, it was exquisitely easy to do. And I'll explain the contradiction there. It just so turns out that my center of gravity isn't around what people feel around about me.
Wow.
I'm that much of a nerd that I derive my deepest sense of belonging from my own sense of gravity, right? From my own proximity to the things that I hold dear, right? So I will, because I'm not I don't even know the phrases that I could deploy that would be accessible to you, or popular to say. I've never been a popular. I was never. My sister was more popular than me in university. But I was never the go-to guy in terms of what's popular to do or something. I was always the nerd growing up. So my axis was around my internal sense of integrity, right? Um, and so when I started to ask these questions, it was like I was in possession of a virus of some kind that I needed to keep hidden from the rest of the community. But people started to notice. People started to notice. Pastors started to notice, right? And would call me and inquire gently but persistently about my faith. That, you know, we've noticed you're not speaking in tongues. And I'll say, well, I learned how to respond to keep the prying eyes at bay, right? I would say stuff like, yeah, I'm on a journey or stuff like that, just to, you know, alleviate the feverish concerns around me. Um, yeah, I would say things like that. I would say I'm on a journey or stuff like, but it persisted. It got so um, involved or involving or concerning to the community that it got all the way to the chancellor, right? That I was um, that then my attendance at chapel services were dwindling, was dwindling. That I wasn't, and it didn't help that I was getting married to an Indian woman, right? Right. And because a lot of I dare say this, I might as well go ahead and say it, but a lot of the pastors around me then were culturally naive, and not they would say bizarre things like, even though my wife right now is even more Christian than I am, and I don't subscribe to the faith, they would say things like, um, your wife is Indian, so is she worshiping snakes and all that? It just felt those kind of anthropologically ignorant things to say, but you just, because of the atmosphere of politeness and respect around you, you just say, no, right? She's as Christian as they come. There are more Christians in India than in Nigeria. It's an issue of size. It's a matter of size. When you have a billion people and a cross section of those billion are Christian,
Yeah.
it's highly possible that there are more than the Christians you have here. Well, I started to, but before I got married, it really started to feel jarring to people when the loud service is going on in the main chapel of the community, the tabernacle. I would see my colleagues in their beautiful Sunday service dresses going, and I'll stay indoors reading Karl Marx or reading Deleuze or some other person that I was excited in. And they would knock on my door and say, "Aren't you coming?" I'll say, I had lots of beautiful excuses. Um, but yeah, it started to get to a point, Freddie, when they would want to frame interventions for me. They started to conduct interventions, maybe a prayer for me, or to take me to a pastor or to relieve me of leadership positions gently, right? Where I would be recommendable for some leadership. At this point in time in the university, I had gone on NYC and I was back to do a PhD and a master's and a PhD, right? And my journey continued. So maybe the thing to say then, just to sum it up, because I tend to be long-winded, is just to say that it was difficult because it meant that I was increasingly isolated. There was no one to have these conversations with about my cracking open. It wasn't until I left the university that I could truly blossom, that I could really flourish, and I could find others who were just as willing, who were breaking away and didn't find it pathological, and didn't dismiss or pathologize the faith as well. They didn't say evil. They just felt beauty has to be something larger than the boxes we were contained in. And maybe staying with it is a form of grace. Maybe God also spills, right? At this point in time, I was already in touch with panentheism, which is a theological position that notices that God cannot be contained. God is in everything, intercarnate, not just incarnate, but intercarnate through everything. Everything is in God and God is in everything. And these things are discovering themselves, almost like the entire universe is a teenager and it's awkward. And God is gangly and figuring things out. Almost like God created things by accident, and it's like, oh, did I do that? It was this humbling idea, not of a magisterial God with his arms akimbo, but with a God that is still figuring things out, right? And it's not
that sense of adventure.
A sense of adventure and emergence and co-participation that didn't reduce itself to who has it and who has the power and who is more righteous, which were the ingredients of war that I could sense into. They're the ingredients of binaries and wars and tribal exclusions and all the things that I hated about being alive, right? And so it wasn't a choice. None of this was a choice. It wasn't. People would like to frame it as, you relapsed and the devil caught you and stuff like that, right? And it just feels, it feels woefully inadequate to my experience.
So, but the interesting aspect of, I know when I started to also question, I had very well-meaning friends and uncle who would tell me, you read too much. I think your problem is that you read too much.
Exactly.
There's some books you shouldn't be bothering about, and all of those things. But I started noticing something. So growing up, if I was with maybe Muslims or Buddhists, there was a sense of, how do I live here? Because we were all raised to believe that, okay, do not be unequally yoked. And so, you somehow just go around spaces without even voicing it out, but somehow you feel like, okay, when do I leave this place real fast? And there was just this idea of wanting to remove yourself and be apart from people and certain things. But when I started getting into this concept of moving from separation to oneness, to God who was incarnate, and I love your word, also interconnected in that way, I started to experience greater sense of freedom. I also realized that I had a more grounded sense of loving, and there was no intention to convert anyone. I wasn't going to make a friend with somebody so that I can colonize you into my colonized mind and faith. But and there was just this idea of letting people be. And so I when they asked me, how are you sure that this journey of saying all faiths have something beautiful, and maybe our idea is not to say this or that, but understand, yes, what is the beauty, what is this perspective giving me, but what can I learn? And in a way, it's about the unfolding. That don't just be static about it, keep learning. But there are words you have used that I love. You spoke about blackness and whiteness, and I want us to go there. And in a sense, the way you describe whiteness wasn't even about just white people. The way you describe blackness wasn't even about black people. But I kind of see it in the language that I like. I see that whiteness as that concept of eugenics and separation, that inherent thinking of that are perpetuated across our world, where some people are, maybe I'm separate from you, I'm separate from the world. So I want you to help us unpack it, because a lot of the people that are going to be listening to this are on this same journey that we are on, but maybe just a little, maybe still not further down, just coming along. So most of them are understanding now that what we've battled with, whether it's racism, or you come to Nigeria where they're talking about Christian genocide, or tribalism, or ethnicity, or religion, you find that all of these are dualities, Christian versus Muslim, black versus white. And in a sense, that duality is pretty much a paradigm that the world has run on. The entire age, the age of the modernity, as it were, seems to be very rooted in it, even colonialism. But in the way you've understood the concept of whiteness and blackness, I want maybe give us sort of like a walkthrough of how you're seeing that the paradigm, and what is the beauty in this journey away from the binaries into a more inclusive, holistic kinship. You spoke about kinship
Right.
with the earth and
Right.
also kinship with others, regardless of color and faith.
Right. Beautiful question. It's a hard leap of some kind, a quantum leap, I would say, from discussions about um, theological underpinnings and orientations to racial matters, but it's possible. You're right. You're very, very right to notice, and it's rare to say this, but you're right to notice that the world runs on a binary system, on binary structures, the legacies of which were inherited from the period of time in our collective history called the Enlightenment, which progressively called the Enlightenment, the 17th century, when we started to try to make sense of the world. This is Euro-American history, right? And because we were part of a global colonizing project through the transatlantic slave trade, we were kind of grafted into this world-making process that habituated and compelled us to see the world as this or that, black or white, God and man, light and darkness, right? And it's easy to see the good versus evil. It's a versus structure,
Yeah.
right? It's the things and opposites. We know how we learned back in school. I don't know where it's school, but growing up in, I did some of my growing up in Lagos, and it's teachers versus farmers, right? Or teachers are better than farmers, or farmers are better than teachers,
Yeah.
right? It feels puerile, childish to think about the world that way, but it's just as childish, I believe, to think about the world as binaries, right? Because the world is processual. And by processual, I mean it flows. Things are not as easily um, delimited or designatable as we think. To bring this conversation home to notions of race, there are people who are white presenting, who, upon taking the DNA test, find out that they're pretty black, right? Right. I know. I've watched a number of
Interesting.
shows, or they watched a number of shows where someone disavows black people and says, "I hate black people," so I hate. Go back to where you came from. And the intervention of the show creatively is to introduce this person to their lineage, and they find out they're the very things that they hate, just a few degrees removed from perception, right? And that's the idea of process, right? It's a different way of looking at the world as 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 connected, entangled, and constantly emerging, instead of ahistorical and suddenly there, light versus dark, right? Like there's something in physics called, I think it's Poisson's principle or something, Poisson's principle. It's that if you shine a perfectly spherical, um, if you have a spherical shape of light on the wall, at the very center of the light would be a point, a pinch of dark, of shadow, right? If it's perfectly spherical, you would find darkness right there in the middle. And this is not, you would think that illumination in its heart is deeply illuminating. Instead, there's shadow in the very heart of light. Right? It's that the things that we reject, the things that we exteriorize, are already part of us. The things that we try to say is outside, they're on the other side, they're not us. I once said, these were my journalistic insights. I used to write every day to an imaginary Palestinian rabbi called, what's his name? I forget. Theophilus. Flavius Theophilus. I just made up a name. I think it was named after, I'm not even sure I'm getting this right, but I used to write every day to him. When you asked me how it was easy for me, and if you had anyone to talk to, I had an imaginary friend. And I would write back to myself to encourage myself on my journey, right? And one of the insights he wrote back to me, as me, right, was, if we could get rid of other faiths, if we could get rid of other faith orientations, just to preserve Christianity, right? Christianity is the militant forms of Christianity that are alive today. The popular forms run on the presumption that we should convert everyone else to the right side. If we get rid of the other competing ideologies, then the utopian heaven might come. Like if we did that, Christianity would disappear. Right? If we could get rid of anything that's not Christian, Christianity would disappear, right? Because it's just like saying, the American car, right? I teach in the United States, so the American car, right? The Trump, the orange dictator in the White House now, was speaking about the American car. The American car is not a thing, right? The American car is dependent on Canadian resources, Japanese resources. Like if you could peel everything, the layer of identity back, you would see that it is a process between many things. It's not a product, it's a process. It's a stream of thresholds and layers and borders and contributions from the entire world, right? There's no such thing that is purely simple as the American car. And it's in the same way I speak about race, because I teach about race, black studies, and all of that in the university in the United States. I think about blackness, brother, not as a simple identity. Of course, there is a form of blackness that is identifiable with both of us are black, right? Or both of us are African. Blackness comes into the conversation where we're speaking about the experiences of the particular African descendants who moved and live in the United States, right? And they were known as black, right? But I don't think about blackness simply as skin. I think about blackness as the processing of the world, as a world in emergence, right? And I think about whiteness not as white people, right? There's a lot of anti-blackness and from black people and indigenous people, anti-whiteness, right? But to me, whiteness is the racializing arrangement of power or proximity to power, right? It is how bodies are neutralized, naturalized, discretized, cut off from the field, cut off from ancestrality, individuated, and supposed to be separate, right? So you're right to think about whiteness as a form of separation, as a technique of power that is dedicated to the discretization of bodies, right? So Nigeria as
it kind of thrives on the illusion of separation, because in a sense,
yes,
we are not separate from anything. The microbes are part of the entire system, but there's still the illusion, and you're disconnected from an entire ancestry and the entire history, and your creativity, your innovation, your invention seem to be only by your own sense of innate genius. They don't understand how it's all an evolution that has been coming. It's all an interconnected web of intelligence that is seeking to present itself, fortunately, just through you in that moment in time. But somehow we want to articulate it and own it and individualize it. So that's the tension. Yeah, go ahead.
It reduces the field, and this is what white modernity enacts so assiduously, so persistently. It reduces the field to the individual, right? It says cognition is in the individual, agency in the individual, responsibility, accountability, value, beauty, all these things that are probably floating out in the universe. Let's trap it in this thing we're calling the citizen subject, the self, right? So the self is performed as separate, right? It's a performance of separation. Think about how black African people were made black. That operation is whiteness, right? African people were captured. The first slave ship was called Jesus of Lubeck, right? This is the first slave ship was called Jesus of Lubeck, and there were prayers on board, right? To it's a beautiful segue. It's a beautiful way to connect both strands of our conversations, right? Race has never been apart from theology, has never been apart from how bodies are constantly still being manufactured, right? So African bodies were captured and they were processed into white props, right? They were separated from kinship, from ancestrality, from their shores, and they were divided into 3 feet by 6 inches by not 6 inches, 3 feet by 3 feet, I believe, or something close, I forget. Cubicles in the slave ship, so it wasn't economy class. Of course, it was cubicles, and they were separated. That's whiteness. Whiteness already showing up in the architecture of the slave ship. It was an effort to discretize bodies, to make them into pixels, right? And then they were given names. They were modified and manufactured within the plantation. And that is where blackness emerged from. Blackness with a big B, not blackness with a small b, which is distinction I make. It was the identity of blackness, the idea of separation. And
that
it's
was
a white opposite.
So that blackness becomes anti-white.
Yes, that blackness becomes anti-white, but you can be anti-something and still be part of its logic.
Yes, I get that point.
Right.
Because you were still a construct of its operation and a creation of its own making.
Exactly. You're a passenger in its vehicle, right? and you can fight and scream all day for access or equality or all those rights, but you're still part of its logic. It's like those beautiful sci-fi movies on Netflix, where at the end, well, Netflix or otherwise, where at the end of the movie, the just before the credits, the we realize in the most shocking of shockingest plot twists that the hero was a villain all along. You know those kind of stories, right? That victory that you gained was just part of the plan of the villain all along. And just before it fades to black, we realize, oh my goodness, there's going to be a part two. Well, that's exactly the sequel here. It's that blackness as performed, the big B blackness, the identitarian, confrontational, give me a seat at the table blackness is a white operation.
You also said something about process, about progress is part of modernity, and in a way that you talk about post-humanism.
Yes.
When we talk about post-humanism, how does these power relations between white and black change in this new world order of post-humanism? How do we reimagine our way of being, of thinking, and living in this new world?
Well, I think we've always already had a sense. By we, I'm speaking probably from Yoruba people, because one part of my history that I did not mention was that for my PhD, for instance, and this was still part of my journey, still at the university in Nigeria. I went to study with Babalawos, which was really frowned upon. But you can see, I studied with Babalawos in a Christian university. That should tell you that I didn't give a shit. I was going to do it, and I insisted on doing it, and I got my PhD in that way. But the sense here is that we've always had a sense of an animist world, a more than human world, and it's the beautiful sense that some scientists are coming around to understand today, that the human is a placeholder, not a final or complete or it's not a project that is transcendent or complete. We are the enactment of bacteria, for instance. We're now learning that, I don't know if you know this, but it's becoming popular to say that we don't have one brain, we have two brains. The second brain is in the gut, right?
Yes.
We do a lot more of our thinking. I'm slapping my stomach. We do a lot more of our thinking here than here. That of course many people might push back against that. But I'm speaking not just poetically, but in a way as to signal the potential of what we're discovering about our gut bacteria. Right? That the microbiome has an outsized influence on how we move and our behaviors and our feelings, which coincides with what we're learning about what we eat. So it is true that we are what we eat, right? That already breaks the impervious outlines of the human and renders us ecological creatures, right? So if bacteria and food and chemical signals, and if all these things are not just that they made us in a long time ago, but they are making us, then we're not as special as we think we are, right? My son is autistic.
Yes.
Some time ago, many years ago, he would hate people coming into our home, and we would have to apologize to them and say, we're so sorry, could you leave, right? Because he found it overwhelming, sensorially overwhelming, to have new people, new faces. He couldn't process that, right? He's 5 or 4. And then my wife and I learned about this bacteria called Lactobacillus reuteri, which was, I believe, a lot more present in previous diets. It's not as present in our modern day diets. I may be getting the bacteria wrong, but I'm sure I think it's Lactobacillus reuteri. And then we introduced this supplementarily, with supplements. We introduced it to his diet. We started to put it in his porridge, the things that he could tolerate, because he couldn't even eat many foods. The texture would overwhelm him. He was incredibly picky, and picky is not doing him a lot of service here. He was very sensitive to texture and food, I would say. And we would introduce it to his food, and summarily, and I'm not lying, I shit you not, summarily, my son started to welcome guests, right? Not too long from then, he started to open his arms and greet people when they come into the house. or linger by them awkwardly. Yes, he would linger by them and stare at them, but he was not repulsed or irritated by people showing up. Even our notions of friendliness and sociability, they're not human. They're already more than human. We are the interstitial emergence of more than human streams of becoming. We are post-human in that sense, right? We are not centrally ourselves. We cannot be ourselves without the others, right? Right? To think, I was just telling people in Brazil. I just came back, like I said, I came back. I was teaching in a classroom there at FDC in Belo Horizonte. Um, there, you know, there is a study that demonstrates that some of our literary gifts and powers come from certain bacteria as well, found in sourdough, right? And I made this joke that William Shakespeare's gifts are not his; they come from bacteria, right? So our ability to write these things are posted. So when you ask a question like, what does it signal for a new kind of world? Well, I think that when we start to relieve ourselves of the legacies of the Enlightenment and how it deposited agency firmly and exclusively in the human, then we start to notice that the world is intelligent. The world has agency. And I'm not just talking about things that have brains. I'm talking about the world itself. The field is intelligent. It might even reorient us to this massive topic called AI, which I just spoke about just a few weeks ago in Paris. That intelligence is not human. It is post-human. It is more than human. We pretend that we're the owners of it. But I like the words of the Christ, and this is how I will end it. I like the words of the Christ when he was speaking to his disciples or speaking to naysayers who were critiquing him, I think, if I get my Bible right, for receiving praise or something like that. And he said, if the sons of men will not praise, even the stones will cry out, something like that.
Yes.
The stones will cry. It feels theoretically significant to me. It doesn't. Voice is not human. The things that are supposedly ours are not ours. There are critters in our face, Ferdy, in our cheeks, in our foreheads, called demodex. They live in our faces. They die in our faces. No cleansing regime can ever get rid of them.
We are their earth.
We are their earth. Our
Yes.
faces are their land. When you touch your face, you're colonizing a different territory. Right? It's not your face. They live there. They till the soil. They're ugly to look at. They look like aliens. They look like the birth child of between the tardigrade and the aliens from Arrival. That movie. Right? It's a stunning and yet liberating thing to think about.
But you opened a lot for me. One of the things I wanted to talk about is how the world has shaped neurodivergence. You spoke about your son, and I'm listening to you speak about him. And the world is very neurotypical. I think when it comes to how we've structured the world, it's knowing, in a sense, the idea that this is the way to be. This is what normal looks like. You have to feel this way. Everybody has to fit into a 9 to 5, and everybody has to. We're still with the industrial hangover, where we were all moved from being to machines, and we're all raised to be functional, but not necessarily embrace our expression and our uniqueness. So in a sense, you've spoken about how just in its sense, raising an autistic child, where over the years, autism has been pathologized and diagnosed as a disorder, medicated. And we're finding that in raising a child, you're also talking about how changing the diet can also even affects the way he shows up in world. I mean, who would have thought a diet, introducing things to the diet that was more natural, rather than medicating him, and we're over-medicated as a generation, they say. So, I love when you talk about, but I wanted to get your insight into how we're rethinking this neurodivergence, how we must see them not as, I don't know if they fit into your concept of fugitivity in the way that it's almost a breakaway from the norm. And it's almost, so, and just even parents, teachers, trying to now see them for the geniuses that they are, not through the paradigm of I have to move you to fit into the neurotypicals, rather than allowing them find their space in the world that makes the world even more beautiful.
Here's the point. I think in breaking away, we perform our deepest fidelity to that which we break away from. It may seem ironic or contradictory, right? The way we understand faith or fidelity is in staying put. But what if the ground beneath our feet has always migrated? What if the world is movement? Right? Instead of stable background, what if the world is movement? Then fidelity to the world is also to move, right? It's also to transgress the boundaries. It's also to lean on the fences. It's also to become fugitive, right? Neurotypicality is not a type of brain. It's the presumption of order. Is the presumption of propriety. Is the presumption of this is how to be in the world. And that could be a form of settlement, a form of care. But like I told people, 4,000 people yesterday in a course that I'm starting, care as embraced can quickly become a form of asphyxiation, right? The gentle embrace of a mother, if held too long, can start to choke the child, or to choke the child. So neurotypicality is the embrace becoming a chokehold, and this chokehold is exhausting us. It's the way you've described practically. It's the 9 to 5, go to school, go to work, get a job, get a lot of money to yourself, engage in social media, die. It's the rinse and repeat. It's the idea that there's nothing else to do. It's just be in this place. This is how to see the world. This is how it has always been done. This is how everything. It's that fundamentalizing, essentializing idea that life has been figured out. That life is sort of surprise. That there's no more enchantment. There's nothing else to do, right? But my son taught me, and maybe I'll respond to your question in this way. I came home from Santa Fe once and brought a gift. I was invited to speak in a community that was celebrating my work, and people gave lots of gifts. So when time I travel, I usually go with an extra box to bring in the gifts that I come back home with. And one of them was a puzzle piece that looked like Tetris blocks. You know Tetris, right?
Yes, I do.
The L shape, the Z shape, all of those shapes, right? We played the game. And it seemed like this is Tetris, the non-digital wooden Tetris. And the idea of these colorful pieces is to put them and complete the puzzle. I've written about this elsewhere. I came home to my son and I gave him this, and he promptly tore the toy open. The pieces fell to the ground, and he didn't even say hi, Dada. He just went straight into putting the pieces together. I went back into the room, refreshed myself, came out, and my son had in his hand several pieces of the puzzle, and he said, "Could you throw this away?" And I was like, Kea, that's not how puzzles work. You have to put everything you have to complete the puzzle by putting everything in there. You don't throw the pieces you don't like away, right? But he insisted. And so I just took the pieces and put them in my pocket. I wasn't obviously going to throw them away. I went about doing my day's work. And I came back to him at the same place, and he had more pieces in his hand. He said, "Could you throw this away as well?" And at this time, I was getting exasperated. And I was trying to explain to him, I was like, "Yeah, that's not how it works. You see, let me explain to you how puzzles work. You have to fit," and my eyes glanced at what he was doing. Ferdy, he wasn't completing the puzzle. My son was arranging the puzzle pieces that looked alike. Right? Imagine the 7-1, right? He arranged all the 7s in a line, like that. He arranged all the Z's in a line.
So there was a pattern in his mind.
There was a pattern. So, of course, when you do that, there's not space enough. There are lots of empty spaces between where nothing fits anymore. And so he arranged it all that way. And that's why he was giving me the other pieces that they don't fit into my scheme of things. And I realized that there were two autisms at work in that moment. My autism and his autism. My autism, which I spell as OUGHTISM, that I ought to see the world in this way. It was my autism, right? Like, that I ought to see the world out. This is the way you ought to complete the puzzle. My son was not committed to what the product and their manufacturer said. He was reinventing something else. He was alive to other possibilities, you see, that I could not see because of my neurotypicality. Right? So that is autism and autism. That is how we often pathologize surprise or pathologize the fugitive. Right? Do you know, for instance, that real fugitives, and I'm not saying that what we're calling fugitivity is less real, but fugitives from the slave plantations, especially in the United States, were pathologized as sick people. Right? That even if you contemplated leaving the slave plantation, you were brandished as crazy. You were thought to be crazy. This is early psychology diagnosis. It was called drapetomania. So if you had a feeling like, I really don't feel I want to give these guys 5 stars. Your service is poor. They whip me every morning and night, and I have to get this cotton, work these cotton fields. I'm not liking their service, so I think I'm going to leave. If you had those feelings, you were crazy. And there was a diagnostic tool for that. It was called Rapitomania. I forget the dude who invented that. Yeah.
That's
This
crazy.
is
I've never heard
early
this.
disciplinarity. This is how the world is manufactured, right? The machine of the world manufactures control.
But the
And
thinking here is
yeah,
there are many type of this phenomena that you just called now, where
yes,
we pathologize things to we normalize false pathologies, and we
yes,
start to design curriculums around them, and
around it.
we optimize the curriculum, we productize it, we get everybody else to adopt and adapt to it. So in a
Yes,
sense, I'm just sort of wondering how much of this is still running the world, and we are unaware. We're not even aware of their mechanism. Yet we are victim of the design, right? But I also wanted to segue that into when you spoke about decolonizing the African mind. So
mhm.
I didn't mention, but I'm also a filmmaker. So I run
Yes,
one
I
of
do.
the
I've come to know that ever since I
yes.
received your
So
invitation.
so so I have I run an animation studio, one of the biggest here in Lagos. And the interesting thing, we want to tell stories. And when I look at the Eurocentric world of how good and evil, the pre-colonial era and the prehistoric era, a lot of the wars were very. Europe was a bloody continent, as it were. Interestingly, on some of the research documents, they actually said that the Africans were not necessarily about taking each other's land as or taking over another person's religion. That the Yorubas were not particularly interested in going over to the north to get the northerners to now take on their own religion. And the Igbos were not interested in moving over to the west to say, Yorubas, leave your gods, now come and embrace us. There was a coexistence that allowed each other to recognize, honor their ancestry and their spirituality without thinking one was superior and the other was inferior. It was their way of life and they honored it. But when we now come into the era of colonialism, where as Christianity was also coming, it came in pretty much designed with colonial lenses in such a way that still dates. If you're an Anglican and I'm a Pentecostal, the Pentecostals would think of Anglicans like, oh, you guys don't have the Holy Spirit. I'm so sorry. How you missed it. The Anglicans would think of the Catholic, oh, you guys worship the Pope, not the Word. Then, of course, the Anglicans would look at the Pentecostals, you Penterascals, you guys are unbelievable. So everybody's trying to, denominationalism is still pretty much almost an adaptation of colonialism, where for
Right,
me to, I don't honor your spiritual heritage. I need to
right,
move you from your spirituality into my expression of spirituality. So that was conversion. It came with this context of conversion. It wasn't so much about coexisting with the world, but usurping it. Was an empire state of the mind, was imposing over it. But I wanted to see in your own study, when you speak about decolonizing the mind, how can we storytellers, artists, who have been immersed deeply in colonial lenses, now start to approach our storytelling from a decolonized lens, being able to return home to the spirituality that was part of our heritage, our culture, which we don't even know where to find them for most part. I
right.
mean, you're a Yoruba man, you know how to dial into them. I mean, I'm from the south area and southeast. Those regions don't necessarily. There is almost no rite of passage for you to say, okay, this is what my parents, this is what our generation have been. So I wanted you to speak to that decolonizing our minds and for storytellers, because I want us to wrap up in about maybe 10-15 minutes. But this is one part I really want our young Africans to learn from you.
Um, One of the most shocking things that I've learned through the few short years that I've been going to Brazil, for instance, um, about maybe 10 years now, is is how is a story of how things become other things, right? How things are not neatly themselves or exclusively themselves. Um, I told you that I studied with Babalawos,
Yeah.
um, these native healers. For my PhD, I wanted to understand clinical psychology from their perspective. It was a hard thing to do, but it was a necessary thing to do. I wasn't going to not do it. It was impossible to do, and that's why I did it. Um, um, and then I started to learn about, you know, my mother would tremble if she heard me speak about it. She never likes me speaking about issue or something like that. But then I start, what was very interesting was that I would learn through the texts of the African writer series, the Wale Soyinkas,
Yeah.
and not just the Wale Soyinkas, the
Achebes.
Achebes, but the Afro-diasporic writers too, right? Or Lovelace or Caribbean authors, Brazilian authors. I would learn stories about how issue is not the devil. That issue is this trickster, and
Yeah.
an entire cosmology opened up, and a cosmology that didn't necessarily need to live in the shadows of arriving Christian missionaries, right? The idea of a trickster that lives at the crossroads, whose agency is named Ashe, and this Ashe dances across the Atlantic and flows with little tiny things called silicon life diatoms, and these diatoms settle in the Amazon forest and give the entire world oxygen. It's a beautiful story to tell. I think we're still trapped in the binaries and the neurotypicalities of fighting this or that, but there's so many other stories to tell. There's so many other ways to come alive to these moments. But I was saying that being in Brazil, visiting Brazil so many times, I see how they celebrate Orishas there. They have Orisha days, they have Yemoja Day. We've just completed a movie called Three Black Men, right? I think this is going to be on Netflix soon. I've started another movie.
You produced?
Oh no. Well, I'm a producer on the movie, but I was invited into it. It's about three of us, black scholars, black thought leaders from Guyana, from the United States, and from Africa, right? And so the whole movie is us. 3blackmen.com has all the details. It's about us retracing the roots of the Atlantic slave trade in reverse. So we start from Los Angeles and we meet with people there, and there's an entire village traveling with us, and the whole documentary follows us to Brazil, Salvador, and to Ghana, where we went to the slave castles.
I would love it. I would love to see it.
Yeah, it's going to be out. It's also been going to be it's up for an Oscar, so it's very exciting. I've started another one. This one is focused. Not that I started. A group of Brazilian filmmakers decided to do one exclusively on me called The Times Are Urgent, Let Us Slow Down.
Oh yeah,
and it's about the questions you're asking. It's about how do we open ourselves up to other stories, other ways of being alive now. And I'll just invite people to notice as treasure those places where that have hitherto been pathologized or have been named sick or wanting or inadequate or excluded are possibly arenas for the generation of new stories. Stay with it, share it with people. Find the others who are also whisperingly alive to the scandalous ways that reality is betraying its own fidelity. Find them, share your virus with them, and maybe from those spaces, those cracks that are showing up in your skin, new ways of sensing, new modes of perception will emerge. Decoloniality is not against coloniality. Decoloniality is how coloniality is upset with itself, right? It's not like, oh, this is the colonial and this is the decolonial on the other end. No, it's that the colonial is striving to be complete in its thesis. Decoloniality is the radical incompleteness of everything, every fidelity, every notion, every identity, right? That's the gift here. Stay with the incompleteness of yourself, of your journey, of your story, of your lineage. Stay with it, and then because you are not the storyteller. The world is the storyteller. It's not you. You're not the author that moves the pen. Something moves the author that moves the pen. And stay with that. It will secrete itself through the cracks that are showing up right now.
But this is so exciting. You just gave me a lens. Thinking that when we talk of colonialism, those of us raised in colonial cultures, we always think about it as the superimposition of the Western ideals over and above our native and ancestral ways of life. But in what you're saying, somebody who is also practicing African spirituality can become colonial about it. And that context of being colonial about it is failing to recognize the incompleteness of your body of knowledge, and in itself preserving it over and above everyone else, and in such a way that you take the part to define the whole.
Yes, you can see it that way, Ferdy. Yes, you can absolutely see it that way. But also, even more critically, that which resists coloniality could be a form of coloniality, and that's really critical to say. If you lean on a wall long enough, you become the wall, right? You become the tool that you use. So if you're against coloniality, just the logic can co-opt you into the relations or the relationality of coloniality. So it's that we want to be careful about how we engage these things. I'm anti-capitalism. When? On Tuesdays and Thursdays. What time? After work, right? It's that being anti-capitalist could be the genius of capitalism, right? Capitalism saying, okay, I'm going to make these people anti-me so that I can sustain myself and I can be central in the conversation. There you go.
So, Bayo, this is exciting. I think this is going to be the first of many conversations because I love it. In what I'm learning from you, and every time, just even listening to you now, understanding blackness and whiteness beyond race. and understanding colonialism beyond Western invasion and imperialism as this not just about how you're seeing it, but an exclusive take on your position. I want to end with this question. One of the things that you mentioned the Christ, and that was exciting for me because over time I came to a realization that something I saw in the Bible, that there's Jesus and there's Christ, and in a sense, Christ was pretty much almost speaking of the eternal presence, the eternal wisdom that was never born, that was never created, that was never made. And in fact, sometimes the Bible, there's a new translation I fell in love with called the Passion Translation, that somehow was almost describing the Christ like an energy. It spoke about the Christ as a force, and it wasn't just limiting the concept of the Christ to a person, but a movement, right? And a creative force that brought the entire world into existence. But interestingly, in the way that I saw, the way we understand it was that Jesus had a monopoly of the Christ. And that there was no other Christ presence other than him. And after he died, the Bible became the place where you can find the Christ. But in the same Bible, and even when I studied Paul was saying, no, that hidden in every man is Christ. And Paul was saying that this creative force, this eternal presence, this God being, this divinity was not something that was limited to Jesus. In fact, he was supposed to be like a prototype of it, that was supposed to show us an example, not just for us, but of us. And in a sense, it wasn't supposed to be a Christian exclusive position. It was a universal truth. Whether you were Buddhist, there was Christ in you. Whether you're Muslim, that in every religion, even atheists, in every religion, there is an innate force, an incarnated force and being. So that's actually where I am. I'm enjoying this idea that, okay, what about if we rethink the world, that Christ is the God presence in us. So we're not necessarily looking for God, but coming home to him and becoming more attuned with the presence that is present in us, which we've been conditioned to be absent to. So for us, we need to go to the mosque. We need to go to the mosque to find God. We need to go to Mecca or Shiloh or camp. Nigerians have a lot of places where we're like spiritual tourists, where we must go and encounter him. Or there's this holy day where you can encounter God.
Just slip it in and get your miracle.
But I'm rethinking the idea of if each one of us is a divine being, we are sacred spaces. And we try to think of it not just in the Jewish context, or try to think of it just in the limited context of what we think as Christianity, but as a universal truth, where each one is connected and the same. He said, he that is joined with God is one spirit, and we are all one. So the Muslims are not inferior to Christians. Christians are not superior to Muslims. They are all otherness, one of the same, one force, different waves of one ocean, right? And I even so that's actually where my entire thesis is going to. I'm actually even exploring a PhD. I'm currently trying to even look for a school. I think there's a course in MIT that has a combination of conscious storytelling and cinema, because I do film. So I want to learn how this post-humanism, how this oneness of ecology, oneness of creation can allow for us to reimagine our way of being in the world, where we're not coming at the world from this or that, but both and, right? And how do we see this beauty of one connected world, where there is no superior, inferior, left, right as not opposites to each other, but one of the same, right? So I'm excited about it. But seeing someone like you who have almost spent a decade in this, I'm like, how did he get here so early? Because it's like, if growing up in Lagos and being a church boy, you were not allowed to. You even went to explore Babalawos in your thesis. You visited the mosque, and this is an important part that I'm encouraging young people now. So don't shut yourself out. I think it was you that said one of the trick of being outside the box is thinking you're thinking outside the box. That's the mechanism of the box is making you believe that you're outside the box, right? And I love when you say that how we respond to the crisis in itself is part of the crisis. So those things, I love the poetry of it. But if there is a question you would have wanted me to ask, what would that question be as we wrap up?
That's beautiful. And just to say that your treatment of the Christ as archetypally different from particular persons is beautifully composed. I like to listen to. I like to hear you wander through that. And yes, I think of the Messianic as the end of history. The Messianic is the end of history. It's not literally tethered to a person. It's Hiroshima, the bomb blast, that ended time at 8:15 a.m. Its issue, traveling with the slave ships, according to Professor Femi Yuba, to the Caribbean, to the new so-called New World, traveling with the slaves, and being spirited away with the slave ships, and ending the idea of colonial purity. It's all of these things. So the messianic is distributed. It is not exclusive. And so I really dig your composing that about a question that you'd have asked. Well, or also to celebrate this moment. And let's talk about the PhD you like to do. I'm unfortunately, I teach at a college in the United States, McAllister College, so it doesn't really have a postgraduate realm. But I'm connected with professors at MIT and other places. I'm not sure MIT is the place to do what you wanted to do, but I actually came.
I mean, I'll be happy to hear more because it's something that clicked in my mind recently.
Let's do that. Let's talk about it after this whole thing is done. But maybe to say that, yeah, I can't think of a question that I would have wanted you to ask. I just showed up in the playfulness of the moment, and I really appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah.
But you're someone I really enjoy listening to, and just I love your vocabulary, the language of belonging that you've contributed to the studies and to even people who are curious and trying to make sense of the world. You have constantly been that one person that has been there, showing us that even as African, you're not expected. Don't think that consciousness or enlightenment or questioning or even bringing new ways of seeing the world is something that is beyond us, where we should be in survival. So you live that, and I'm happy we're doing this. Thanks for the time. I know you're jet lagged, so get some rest. Thank you so much, and goodbye for now.
Thank you, brother. Take care.